Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director, the original podcast made by a creative director, for creative directors, for aspiring creative directors, for the spouses of creative directors to really understand what the hell is wrong with us. I'm just kidding on the last one, but maybe you can glean some insights about us. But this show really is for anybody who is interested in the role of creative director, what it takes to lead a team of creatives, anybody who's just really looking to get inspired or re-energized. This show is for you. Welcome one and all. I am your host, Jaime Cabrera, veteran creative director. And on the show today, I have another veteran creative director who's been doing this for a long time. His name is Chris DeNinno. He's creative director at InNotion, where I am currently working right now. He was one of the first people that I met on the job. Super great guy, incredible creative director, has worked for a who's who of agencies and has worked for all kinds of great clients. But what I really love about Chris is his passion for teaching. He's involved with an outfit called The Bookshop for Ads, which is a portfolio school right here in LA. He's going to tell us all about that. So without further ado, let's get into it with Chris DeNinno. Hey, buddy, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hi, Jaime, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Yes, likewise.
I know we work for the same company, but we rarely ever see each other except for on this camera. We need to go have coffee again at that spot and see if it feels good.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Or burritos at lunch are always good too.
Wait, burrito? Where do you go for burritos? Isn't there? There's a Nick's, right?
Didn't we go to the place right by the? Well, there's one. You know, there's a Sancho's in Long Beach, actually.
Oh, that's right. We did go to Sancho's that other time.
Yeah. But regardless, no, that coffee spot is cool too.
Yeah, it is good. Hey, so are you getting? Are you seeing light at the end of the tunnel now? We're almost gonna shut down here, hopefully, for a little bit. Are you gonna be able to power down, or are you gonna be cranking away during the break?
No, thank goodness. It's kind of I do see the light. I mean, it's always kind of crazy this time of year, I feel like, for myself especially, but I think for a lot of us, it seems like the fourth quarter is always sort of, you got to power through it, and then you can get a soft landing come holidays. Right. And so yes, I just finished a big project, which is nice, and now I've got I kind of can see a landing strip ahead for the holidays, and plan on taking some time off for a few weeks, and I'm excited. Can't wait. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I just did a little post on LinkedIn this weekend about, how you sort of replenish your stores of creativity, and definitely taking some time off is, I think, one way that you can sort of restore the creative capital, because it gets depleted over time. But, I was doing my research. Obviously, we know each other a little bit. We haven't had the opportunity to work too closely together yet. But just, doing my research and going through your LinkedIn and your resume, I mean, it's so impressive. I mean, you've worked for so many top agencies, and you really have sort of run the gamut of all kinds of clients and different size shops and all that kind of stuff. If you wouldn't mind, give the audience a little overview of your career trajectory, and don't leave any of the big names out here. I'm looking at a couple
sure.
here
No, of course.
Pretty impressive.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been kind of a wild and woolly couple decades, I guess, but it's great. I don't regret it at all. I love my job. I love what I do, and I'm super happy that I found something that I enjoy doing, and have been able to do it for this long, I guess, which, most people, well, not most, but some people aren't as fortunate to find. And I kind of just fell into advertising like most of us do. And, it started back in college, and I took just a random advertising 101 class, thought it was really interesting. My professor at the time, I'll never forget this, but he was really big on, remember that old tabloid newspaper, the Worldwide News? It was totally like fake news back in the day, right? It was like Bat Boy and, like Martians living here, or, Sasquatches being spotted. It's just like a total rag magazine. But it was so funny. He would always bring those clippings to class, and we always got a kick out of it because it was really creative writing when you think about it. And the fact that they're trying to sell it as fact even made it more absurd and interesting and entertaining. And I just thought, wow, this is kind of a cool business, and then so from there I took a few more ad classes, and then I got a job at the school newspaper sort of working in the ad department and, selling ads, comping up ads, going out and, asking the local, school businesses, hey, you want to advertise in the school newspaper? And then I'd write some articles here and there, but I just kind of fell into it there. And then I really got my start, I believe, after school, and I got an internship, and that kind of really set me on my way. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do in advertising. I just knew I wanted to do advertising, and I got a bachelor's in advertising.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know if I wanted to, there was all these different facets, of course. And I remember like one of the first days of my internship, I was interning for a creative team, and they're like, well, what do you want to do? And I go, I don't know. I just want to do this. And they're like, well, what is it? And I go, well, making ads or doing ads. And it was really naive of me, honestly. And they're like, well, if you're going to do this, you should be in the creative department. You should be a creative. And I'm like, okay, so how do I do that?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you need a portfolio. And I'm like, okay, well, I never got that in school. I learned about obviously what a kind of a portfolio was, and of the, the ads I'd mocked up and sold for our school newspaper. That was literally my portfolio at the time.
Yeah.
And so they directed me to this portfolio school, which we can talk about later, called the Bookshop.
Yeah.
Where I sort of cut my teeth and got a student book together and sort of this portfolio of spec student ads, which then parlayed into my getting a real job at the first agency I worked at, which was a Foot Cone Building, working on Kawasaki and TaylorMade Golf and some really other fun accounts like Hilton Hotel. So I got a really nice head first dive into this business, working with a great partner who I'm still friends with to this day, several years later. And then from there, worked at a couple other agencies here in Orange County. We talk about like Southern California is where I live and work now, but from there, moved up to LA and worked in LA for about 10 years. And that's where, I really did my tour of duty, if you will, at Chiat Day for a few years, which I loved, really enjoyed, working on like Activision, video games, and Nissan and Infinity and Visa, a bunch of other accounts I had at the time. And then from there, I moved to Deutsch, worked on Dr. Pepper for a few years, which was really fun. A little bit of VW at the time, but I really took the job to go work on something completely random, which was Dr. Pepper. But that was a really fun experience. And then by about that time, kind of moving up through the ACD sort of ranks. And then my next job was where I got a job as a creative director, which is at this agency called R&R Partners, where we worked on the Las Vegas account, which was really fun, and a few other local accounts here in Southern California. And then, a quick stop at, I feel like it's just like this long train of.
No, I love it. I mean, this is cool.
But I think there was a little bit of a method to my madness, but I think, after there, I got a job at David&Goliath, and I loved that job too. It was really fun and did some great work there. And then that is how I landed back here in Orange County at Enotion, where I am now, where I've been for the last 4 years, and really enjoy it. But I'm an Orange County guy. I'd always worked up there, but always, wanted to kind of plant my roots back down in Orange County, and I've been fortunate enough to do that now. So that was kind of my tour. But I feel, I feel like I've always been like this real transient person in this business. But sometimes of my own will, other times, because of the layoffs. I mean, I'm not afraid to admit I've been laid off a couple times, but I feel like whenever that happens, it's always sort of turned into something even better and brighter down the road. So I feel like, I think at the end of the day, what I like to think about or tell people is like, you got to be happy where you work. And if you're not happy, find a way to make yourself happy or leave. I mean, frankly, the business is too short. This life is too short to work somewhere where you're not happy and not valued. And so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to describe it, right? It's like you described it as like a tour of duty. You've been in all these different shops and all that, and probably have some battle scars to show for it. And we definitely are going to get into your passion, which I love, by the way, because who better to teach up and coming creatives about what we do than someone who has had such a rich sort of background, and we'll talk about the bookshop here. But so, thinking about that your whole trajectory and your whole past, how would you describe the role of a creative director? I love metaphors. I love analogies. How would you describe it?
No, I love this question, and I thought about it quite a bit, and I sort of came up with this idea here. The way I like to think of it, and it started to make more sense as I was thinking through it the other
Yeah.
day, but I like sort of thinking it as like a tour guide. Who's
Okay.
sort of on a leading expedition, right? So not just around the park, but like assume maybe not as extreme as like hiking Mount Everest, but I just like the idea of like being in a foreign city or showing
Mm,
tourists from around town, like your hometown, like so the way I equate it is sort of like as a CD, we've sort of walked that path, we've explored that town, we kind of know where the nooks and crannies are, we know where the hot spots are, we know where the watch out zones are too. But at the same time, as a tour guide, you don't want to you don't want to just lead people and hold them by the hand and give them your tour. You want them to explore and them to discover and find what's
right.
really neat about what they're doing. So I feel like it's kind of interesting, a metaphor for what a CD does is sort of as a you're a guide,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I don't know where I'm always going, right? Like no one really knows where you're going to end up, but I think as a creative director, you have a vision of where your destination should be or what it should be like, but very often when you get there, it's not exactly what you imagined. But I think that's the fun part of the creative process is having an idea of where you end up, but you don't know for sure. I mean, you're lying
Yeah.
if you know exactly where you're going to head up. But I think what's cool is like bringing people along, someone once told me the best way to lead is to give people a reason to follow you, right? It's like
Yeah.
you can't tell people to lead. You need to give them a reason. And so I think it's being like hey, come with me this way, but I'm not going to tell you exactly which route to take. Like this is kind of our destination, but let's get there together and find a cool way to get there. And I feel like that's a kind of a neat analogy for what creative directors
And
do.
so do you feel like you sort of live up to that in your day to day sort of creative direction, right? That you sort of like, hey, I can help you, but you're gonna have to find your own way. Is that kind of the way that you lead?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I think that's a nice way to at least aspire to the way that I like to do it. I'm hopeful that at times that does happen, and I'm not always gonna be exactly right, but I do think it's a nice way to think about what we do because the last thing as a creative director is you don't want to again you don't want to give everyone the answers. You don't want to tell people what to do. You want to help them, you know, get that idea. You want to help them polish that idea. You want to help them get to a place where they're proud to be and that they can look back and say, I did this, of course with the help of the entire team, but it's hard to be I guess a creative leader by you don't want to give people all the answers. You want to be there for answers if they have questions, but I don't think you need to sort of dictate what you're doing. And I guess that's
Yeah.
where that methodology makes sense to me. Is like, yeah, we know where we're going. I'm not going to tell you which path to take. If you feel like you're going the wrong way, I can help sort of course
Right.
correct, right? But
And
yeah,
if you're
it's
going off a cliff, then you definitely jump in and try to
yeah,
save them, right?
well as
But
best I can, yeah. So I may be the one leading them off the cliff sometimes too, so I have to check myself as well.
well, I like this idea of the tour guide, and I also like it in when you think about it. It's interesting because as a good tour guide, I mean, you want to show, you want to show your guests all the great stuff
Yeah,
that a
yeah,
city
exactly.
or that an adventure has to offer. But then in some ways, you kind of also have to show them the other part, right? Because I think on paper, our job looks really cool, and it is cool. I think it's one of the greatest jobs ever. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it, right? There's a lot of
Hmm.
mundane stuff and meetings and stuff that you didn't know that you were going to have to worry about, right? So
Yeah.
as a tour guide, how do you make those detours, or how do you start coaching so that they go, hey, right now it's all rainbows and sunshine because you're coming up with ideas all day. But as you move up the ladder, there's other stuff that you're going to have to worry about as a
Right.
creative director.
When you think about it, to extend the metaphor, right? Like, so the tour guide is on the job, right? He or she is working while you're having fun on the tour, right? You're taking the photos, you're writing back home, you're grabbing postcards, whatever. But the creative director is the one's like, okay, well, we got to be here by 4 o'clock.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, as a CD, you are kind of again, you have
Yeah.
another role to play at the same time as showing people the highlights or pointing them in the right directions, but at the same time they're the ones who are quote unquote on the tour.
Yeah, and you got to keep, to continue this metaphor, and we're gonna get real goofy here, but I mean, you gotta make sure that the bus is gassed up,
Right,
right? You gotta make
exactly.
sure that the Wi-Fi is working. You gotta make sure that they have all
Yeah.
the, they have access to chargers because they're gonna need their I mean, there's all that other stuff that goes into
Yeah.
it. So I
Yeah.
love
Well,
that.
and the thing that
I
I'm
think that's very
always
clever.
Yeah, and the thing that's always been, I don't know, I'm going to say difficult, but something that's always, been in my mind ever since I've been started working more as a creative director and less of a creative is, you want to be proud of the work you create, right? And the last thing I want to do is sort of, screw up someone's really good idea. Like, I think I'm afraid of that. That's kind of this confessions part almost, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it's like these people can come up with amazing ideas. As a CD, sometimes you just need to get out of the way, or you need to help, carry it through. You need to protect this idea. And so, yeah, the same way, it's like being a tour guide. Like, I got to make sure people don't get eaten by a bear or, fall off a cliff, like you said, or something, because I want that experience to be worthwhile. I want the creatives to look back and say, "Oh man, this is such a great campaign. This came out great, and thanks for, collaborating and helping. And when I needed, questions answered, or we needed a fire to get put out, like you were there to help." And I feel like that's really a CD's role. And of course, dealing with all the minutiae that you want to try and protect your creative teams from.
We probably don't talk about enough, right? And I mentioned it in my book, is that, a big part of it is also protecting them, protecting teams, especially younger people, from some stuff that is either going to just get in their head and mess with them, or that they just don't need to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big part of it too. You become protective of your people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we all know by this time, as we are working in this business for so long, it's not easy coming up with a really great idea, and it's even harder to execute one, I feel like. And all that combined, it's like there's a big payoff at the end, or a big promise for a big payoff. Again, something to look back on and be proud of. And you work on a project for so long, and to get there at the end to your destination of your tour, let's say, is like you want it to be something you want to look back on and be proud of, and ideally put it in your book, right? And
Yeah.
have a really nice piece to share and help your own career. And so I think that's a really big responsibility of a lot of creative directors also, is just making sure that people are getting out of their jobs what they want to get out of, and you're obviously getting what you need, because you need to maintain a certain level of integrity with the creative, or what be keeping, of course, our clients happy and selling whatever widgets we're working on. So
Right.
there's that kind of two-folded responsibility, I feel like.
So, given that you've been in this business for quite a while, I got to imagine that you've developed some signature things or some key things as part of your process, tools, different ways to ideate or whatever. Are there any things that you would want to share, just in terms of, like, what is your creative process like when you're leading your team to come up with some new concepts?
Yeah, I'll mention two, and one I believe is extremely difficult, and the other one I think is really easy to do. The first one that's really difficult, I think, is just to listen more, to listen really well, not just to hear, but to listen, to really, take yourself out of that, "Oh, I need to say something" kind of moment, especially
Mm,
in a briefing, or, as creatives, I feel like my brain is like, overflowing with stuff while I'm sitting
yeah,
there. And sometimes just, no, just shut up and listen,
right.
take it in, let other people obviously collaborate and talk and share their perspectives. And I think that's always the hardest thing. And that's something I think anyone, all of us could understand and hope to do more of, is just to be better listeners. And I think it's such a big part in the creative process, because a lot of times people just want to jump right to the process, right? They want to
Right.
jump right in and start coming with ideas. It's like, well, if you actually stop, and I know you talk a lot a bit about it too, just being empathetic and just understanding, seeing where the clients are coming from, really understanding what the problem is we're trying to solve, and then really understanding on a CD level, like who your team is that is working on this, and listening to them, and if they've got questions, try and get those answered as quickly as possible. So I think that's really hard. It's really hard for myself. Like,
Yeah.
people always say you're born with two ears and one mouth, and use them accordingly. And it's sometimes hard to do,
Right.
admittedly.
Well, yeah,
Um,
because we want to. Yeah, I mean, I know I've suffered with this for a while because you want to just shout out the answer, right, or what you think
exactly.
is, and you think there's this kind of mythology that everybody's going to turn around and be like, oh my God, Chris did it again, and they're going to be like
Right. Yeah.
slow
It's so
clapping,
familiar. Yeah.
and maybe that happens like one time in your career, but typically it doesn't, right? Because you just don't have you don't have enough information, you haven't gone through it yet, so
Mhm.
you got to sort of fight the urge to want to like shout out, I got it, I got it, I got it.
And especially as like a young creative or young creative director too, like you're here to, you're in this role, you're here to, have this position of influence or whatever, and you feel compelled, like, well, I've got to say something. It's like, well, maybe you don't, maybe you need just to listen more, and that's going to help you do your job better. So yeah, all that combined, I think no matter what we do in this business, I think if we're all better listeners, we'd probably all get along a lot better and understand each other a lot better, and ultimately come up with the best work possible because we really understand it. So I feel like that's easier said than done.
Right.
Something I try to work on every day. But then the other thing I've learned, and I do this to this day, I've always kind of done it, and it sounds kind of corny, but I'll try to explain, is just to reward yourself. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is to like what we're doing is not always the easiest thing in the world, right?
Right.
Like we'll talk about like kind of my teaching sort of I guess uh
Philosophy.
philosophy and stuff too, but there's sometimes there's nothing harder than staring at a blank piece of paper or having to be creative on demand or what have you. And so I think what's always helped me and what I tell my students is to stop and reward yourself every once in a while. And don't forget that, you can get so much out of it. It's like if you set goals for yourself. So if you sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna concept here for an hour today. Me and my partner, we're gonna sit up, kick our feet back, and we're gonna really pound this brief and really think about this. And if you come up with a couple of great ideas, be like, cool, we nailed those. All right, let's go take a walk. Let's go grab
Yeah.
a drink, or I got to go run an errand. Like whatever these little things that make you happy, and especially I think now in the era of COVID, we're kind of stuck inside our homes, and you can kind of get lost in a hole, if you will. But if you stop and be like, okay, I'm gonna come up with one more idea, and then I'm gonna go take a walk, or I'm
Yeah.
gonna come up with one more great idea, and then I'm gonna go have a beer. Whatever it is, however you want to reward yourself, pat yourself on the back, say, hey, you're a good creative, you can do this. I think there's so much to that, and it sounds kind of hokey, and you don't have to tell people you're doing this.
Right.
But I think it's really good for your self-confidence and for your ability to sort of keep going back to that well, is saying, hey, it's okay. After I, you know, dig this hole, try to figure out these ideas, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna go, relax for a minute. And then I'll come back and I'll work some more. But I think it's really important that you find a way to reward yourself.
Yeah, because I also think that it's in those. Oftentimes, it's in those little respites, those little breaks, that you'll have some other great
Yeah,
idea or a
sure.
build or some other little epiphany, right? And if you don't give
Yeah.
yourself those moments, then you're just kind of churning and churning and churning. Plus, I think there's also you run the risk of just getting um, kind of like driving into a wall if you just keep going without giving yourself a little bit of a
Right.
break.
Yeah, you can't keep banging your head against the wall. You've got to at least turn around and, point in another direction or something. Like I remember an old creditor of mine used to say, when you get stuck, do a 180. So, you're sitting there thinking of
Mm,
something, and you're sort of thinking of a brief, like really close-mindedly almost. You're only looking at one perspective, and okay, I've thought about this for hours now, and I'm totally stuck. It's like, okay, well, take everything you know and flip it on its head, or do a 180, and then come back at it. And maybe you need to come back a couple hours later or the next morning or whatever, but do a 180, and you'd be surprised on, wow, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in a whole new vein of ideas now, because you've made that 180. And I think the way I articulate that is like I reward myself. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to think about it this way, and then I'm going to go I'm not gonna say go do nothing, but I'm gonna do something that makes me feel good. I'm gonna be like, okay, fine, I'm gonna go eat lunch or something, right? I'm gonna call a friend. I'm gonna do something, but I put in the work. Now I'm gonna put in the reward, and then I'll get back to the work after that.
So, in terms of, and again, getting back to your brilliant sort of metaphor about the tour guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the when you're in the thick of it, right, and you got to come up with stuff, and you've got a deadline. Maybe it's a week out or 2 weeks or whatever it is. How big of a of a rope do you give your folks to go off of, right? Because
Right.
again, do you just sort of set them loose and have them go as far as they can before you start pulling on the on the rope to bring them back in, or what does that look like? Because I'm always curious
Yeah.
to know how much chaos is involved in
Yeah.
a particular person's process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do like the idea of giving people lots of rope, let's say, or enough rope. There's that old saying, give yourself enough rope to hang yourself. Like, I don't want to do
Right.
that, but I want to I'd rather pull the rope back than feel like they're pulling the rope away from me, right? I would rather,
Hmm.
I don't want to feel like I'm tethering them. Does that make sense? I don't want
Yeah.
to feel like they're being tethered. I would rather say, you've got all the slack you need, but guess what? If you start flailing, I'll be there to hold the rope for you, kind of thing, or I'll
Right.
pull the slack back for you. So I feel like and again, that's kind of how you grow. That's how I feel, again, how you lead. You give people they want to follow. They want to go. So I don't want to say I want to give them as much leeway as possible, but maybe as much as I feel they need or would use or what have you. And it's probably a case by case basis too, or depending on who the team is or what the project is. Okay, this one I'm going to give them tons of slack, right? On this one, maybe not as much, but I feel like I always want to be giving people as much rope as they want, and then if there's ever a problem, to be there. I think that's really important, to be there as a career director,
Yeah.
no matter what, to help your teams. That I think is being a true leader. It's not telling people where to go; it's being there when they
Right.
need you.
You said something pretty early on, that was sort of a little bit of maybe a self-doubt that we go through, especially probably as we get older, really, right? New things, new technologies, new platforms, new memes, new trends. It's moving so fast.
Mm.
How do you, what does it take? I'll frame it this way. What does it take for one of your younger creatives to bring you along, right? And say,
Mm.
you gotta trust me on this, right? Like, because you to your point, right? We can't know everything. We can't,
Yeah.
at a certain point, there's stuff that they're going to be much more adept at because they're native to it or whatever. So how do you
Mhm.
do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think. Well, first, I'm fascinated by a great idea. I don't care if it's in a TikTok video I see, or a billboard I see, or a flyer in the newspaper. I mean, a great idea is a great idea, and I love it when I see new forms of technology or new forms of creativity, even like and if it's a younger team who's like, oh my gosh, you should follow this person on TikTok, it's amazing, he or she is so funny or whatever. That's a great way to get exposed, or lots of other things. But I feel like I love the idea about this business always sort of evolving and adapting, and you've got to stay sort of relevant. And yeah, if it's someone bringing me something that I've never seen before, or some sort of digital device or platform, I love it.
Yeah.
So does that answer that question,
Yeah,
I
but I
guess?
mean, it's got to be a little bit scary, right? Because it's like you have to be you. I guess the way that I've done it in the past is I kind of have to do. They bring me something, I have to do enough research where I start to maybe understand it a little bit better. But then at a certain point, I think you also have to take a leap, right, and say, okay, you seem to be really passionate about it. I've seen some
Mhm.
other things. It looks interesting. I think maybe it could work. I don't fully 100% get it. I'm gonna back you up, and I'm gonna help you.
Yeah. No, I
Pitch
think
it.
you're right for sure. Yes, you've got to be able to trust that what is being presented to you is the right idea or the right thing. I mean, yeah, and I think it just comes with understanding it, like doing your own research and being, okay, cool, this is what this is about. I may not know everything about it, but I trust the source, or there's
Right.
some other people who are kind of, yeah, that's a good idea, or, whatever it is, doing these just personal focus groups, if you will,
Yeah.
with my teenage kids. I do that all the time. I
Yeah.
have two teenagers, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Dad! Like, why are you on TikTok?" I go, "I'm
Yeah.
not on TikTok. I just want to know. I want to understand. It's fascinating, honestly, and a lot of technology is, and
Yeah,
that's
it's
not
crazy.
necessarily the best example, but." The point being is that that's what I love about this business
Oh
is,
yeah.
when we first started, it was, you know, your TV spot and a few print ads, and if you're lucky, you get an outdoor board, and it's like
Yeah.
nowadays the reins are off, and it's always been exciting, and just you seeing this evolution, and who knows what we'll do next, but yeah, it's
Yeah, it
fun.
was funny. I was laughing. I was because I got two boys as well, two young boys, and they're 11 and 13, and I was telling them I started going on TikTok because I got to promote this book, and I started thinking, well, where are all the up and coming creatives? And they're probably going to be on TikTok. I'm like, nobody wants to see an old guy on TikTok. I'm not going to be doing dances and stuff. So I'm like, I got to come up with like what's my thing on. So I'm like, I'm going to use GIFs, and or
Yeah,
little
yeah.
memes and things. So I'm trying to figure out how I do that. But anyway, so if you see me on TikTok, that's why.
All right.
Uh,
I'll look out for your dancing with your
oh my
book.
gosh, yeah. I don't know if anybody wants to see that, but so speaking of young creatives, aspiring creatives
Mm.
that look at us, you and I, and say, "Hey, I want to be able to do that. I think that's interesting. I want to lead teams." What advice would you give them?
I like, I don't know why I'm this duality thing. I think being resilient is one
Mm,
really strong piece of advice, and being passionate, and I think they go hand in hand. I don't think you can be one without the other, but I'll start with being passionate. And like, I think how I opened when we talked about it early on was, like, I really love what I do, and I genuinely mean that, and I feel fortunate that I've been able to find a career that it isn't always, as financially rewarding as some other things or all these other things, but there's some really cool personal reward you can derive from this business. Like, I made that thing,
yeah,
or look at what I made, look at what came out of my brain. And I always thought that was a really cool part of this business. And so, that said, doing so is not easy. There's a huge, gauntlet of things to always get in the way, or to just prevent you from not only coming up with a great idea, but, as we all know, executing and selling and producing an idea. And so you've got to be able to be passionate. You've got to be able to put the time in, and not as cheesy as saying, if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life.
right.
But I think if you genuinely are excited about what you do, it makes all the doing that much more rewarding and interesting, and keeps you more resilient. Because the first thing I always, I think a lot of people don't realize, or when I tell new students of mine too, it's like, for every ad you see, there's hundreds that have died to let that one live.
Painful,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. They've
Even,
died
your
painful
friends,
deaths.
yeah, casually sitting on the couch and saying, "Oh, look, there's a spot I did," and they're like, "Oh, that's cool." I go, "Yeah, did you know that I spent like 6 months on that thing, and you
Yeah,
know, hundreds of other versions of ideas, or versions of that idea?" And it's just, it's kind of dumbfounding sometimes how much effort we put into what we do to get it right, because it is important that we get it right. But you've got to be resilient, and you've got to really love what you do, I think, to be successful in this business. So I tell that of a lot of all the young people I meet in this business.
yeah, and it can be tough, right? Because it can be demoralizing, especially if you think you really believe in something and a really cool idea, and you present it to the client, and they're not having it, they don't get it, they don't like it. It can be
Yeah,
demoralizing, and it's tough to stay. I agree with you that you have to stay in that zone, that kind of like passionate, and everything's this is
yeah,
exciting, and it's hard, and I
yeah.
know, an old mentor, creative director of mine had the knack for doing that, because I would get
Hmm.
really beat up and really demoralized, and he was like, you can't do that, because a the client wants you to be at your best, I think, all the time, and that's what they're paying you for. And if you kind of sit in that space for too long and get bitter, it's gonna affect your ideas, right? You're gonna start doing things that you think are safe or that you think they're gonna like, and which is never any good. So you have to find a way to kind of re-energize and reignite and get excited again. And I think it's a learned skill.
Yeah, and have perspective. Like, again, like, I'm a big baseball fan. You can equate it to Major League Baseball players, right? Like, 3 out of 10 times they may find success, but they're going to fail 7 out of 10 times. But if you fail 7 out of 10 times in baseball, you're in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Right? If you're batting 300, that means you're striking out 7 other times. Or getting out, at least. So if you think of it as that, it's like, but there's nothing more fun, I would think, in the world, or more passionate to be like a professional athlete. Like, there's some serious passion, but you've got to have that passion. You've got to have that resiliency to get up there and keep swinging, right? And so I feel like that's a lot about this business too. Now, of course, not every ad we do is going to be a home run kind of thing, but by and large, you want to get up there every single time and hope that you do succeed, and you are going to succeed, and the ones who do succeed on average are the ones who are going to do well in this business. And you've got to teach people that, hey, not everything is going to be a home run, but that doesn't mean you can't get up there and give it your all every single time. And all those sorts of metaphors apply there. But baseball is a sport based or invented around failure, and I think a lot of advertising is too. Not failure, but like ideas that don't survive, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So Justin, and like I said, I mean, we've talked a couple of times, but I just love, especially now, I'm really seeing how passionate you are about what you do, and I can see how that passion translates over into your side gig here, which is being an instructor at the bookshop, which is a portfolio school. First of all, tell us a little bit about what the bookshop is, what it does. I think you came from there, so I'd love to know that a little bit about that as well. But just kind of give the audience a little overview of what the bookshop is all about.
Sure, yeah, and I think it's kind of, like you said, a reflection of the passion I have, or just the love I have for this business. Is so much so that once I started working in this business, I wanted to find a way to give back and to do more, and so that's why I've for several years now. So for about the last 10 or 12 years, I've been an instructor for the Bookshop Portfolio School, which is locally based in LA. It's been around for like 30 something years, and it was something that I took to get my portfolio into shape before I went out and got my first job. So it's designed to help people either right out of school or had no idea whatsoever of what advertising is, but to give them a really strong groundwork for what it takes to get a job in this business, and then at the end of the process have a portfolio of spec ads that you can then take out with you and promote yourself with and hopefully get a job with. So like I love what I do. I love like exposing people to this business and talking to people about, hey, this is kind of what we do here and this is how it works. And so a lot of what I've done as an instructor is essentially what you do as a creative director all day long. You're kind of looking at ideas and shepherding them along and teaching people kind of the pitfalls and ways to avoid them. And so that's a lot of what I do as an instructor for the bookshop. And the class itself, if you go all the way through, there's a series of like 8 or 9 courses that are a semester long. So 9-week courses. You meet one night a week and you're taught the basics of how to identify a good idea, how to construct that idea, and then eventually how to blow those ideas out into big, fully fleshed campaigns. And then again, that's what becomes the content of your portfolio. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what that does. And I'm not unique in that. There's literally hundreds or thousands of us alumni who are currently working in the business. And so I love that about it too, is not only, former classmates of mine are still friends to this day. We work all around the country, some even internationally. But I always tell students, like, hey, you're joining this fraternity or sorority of
Yeah.
people now who, it's such a great asset to have that network of people that you can lean on and talk to and commiserate with or just celebrate as well. So I really like that about it.
Yeah, I mean, I never even knew because I kind of came up a different route, right? So I never really even knew that there was such a thing as a portfolio school because from what you've told me and from what I've seen at other places, I mean, you're getting people who are coming in from some other career, right? But they felt like they had some sort of creative bent to them, whether they're
Hmm.
writers or designers or something. So this isn't always just people that are coming straight out of school. I mean, you might have somebody that's starting that wants to start a whole new career and can go through the program, develop a portfolio of spec stuff, and actually go out and get work. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure you've seen
absolutely.
some pretty cool success stories like that.
Yeah, I have former students who were teachers,
Yeah.
a lawyer, just other industries outside of advertising, whether it's marketing or sales or real estate. Like I've had people in my classes who have come from all walks of life, which is great because that again just I think is another plus to this business because we all kind of come from this diverse sort of background, and that's what I think helps make the ideas even better is that diversity and that different perspective you get from people. So yeah, I love that about it. And so a lot of the students are, in school or just out of school or looking to, okay, I know what advertising is all about, but how do I get into the creative side? And that's really what this is set up to be because there's that old catch 22 of, how do I get a job in advertising without a portfolio, but how do I get a portfolio without a
Right.
job in advertising? And so this is that.
Right.
And there are, of course, other portfolio schools out there like Creative Circus. I think they just shut down
Yeah, I
actually
think I
in
heard. Yeah.
Atlanta, which is so sad to hear. And lots of friends of mine went through that and loved it. And of course, Art Center in Pasadena and a few other really well-known ones. And those are great. And there's no knock at all. Those are more like accredited master's programs, if you will, whereas the bookshop was always intended to be a little more sort of down in the weeds and sort of grassroots, if you
Yeah,
will,
and accessible.
um, and accessible. And like all the classes pre-COVID, of course, were always taught at the agency where I was working at the time, and all of us other instructors. I'm not the only one. There's about a half a dozen of us who teach various courses, but we're all working professionals. Most of us are CDs in and around the LA area, so we'd always teach our classes at the agency we worked at. So that was another cool benefit of our
Yeah.
students coming, being, wow, this place is awesome. You guys have a ping pong table and a keg. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
but don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was really cool to exposing people to like, this is what it's like in advertising. And not only am I, instructing you for this course, but I'm actually a working professional. So please ask me questions. You have this forum, what's it like to work in an agency? What is it really like on the ground floor? And so I think that's always been a really great benefit of the class because you get a real inside look as well.
Yeah. And I've heard, people that reached out to me that listen to the podcast, and a lot of them aren't even in this business. They listen, and I'm thinking they're listening because they have an interest in it. So, you
Mhm.
heard it here first, right? If you are not, trained, you didn't go to school for this or advertising, or there's an alternate route, and people should look into this if they feel like they have that kind of ability and that interest. But I mean, what you've told me about, again, getting back to the accessibility of it, it's affordable. It sounds like it's super inclusive. Can you tell us a little bit about that aspect of it?
Yeah, for sure. And before I forget, and not to plug too hard, but it's called the
No, plug away.
Bookshop School. Yeah, the Bookshop School for Ads. The website, maybe you can even add it as a link, but it's thebookshopads.com. And from there, you can go and find all the information you've ever wanted to know. But um, essentially, what's great, and maybe I'll start with what you just said. It is affordable, and it is sort of something you do in addition to what you're currently doing. It's not a full time,
Right.
full load of classes. It's a few hours a week class time, 2 or 3 hours a week in class, one night a week. But there's obviously outside time because of your concepting. You're sitting and you're working on your ideas outside of class, and you come to class, you present your ideas, I critique them, we move on, sort of thing is how it works. But each of the classes is only, I want to say relatively affordable, like $600-700 for a class, which
Wow.
sounds pretty good still for
Oh, yeah.
9 weeks, and it's
Yeah.
pretty intensive. And I always tell people it's everything you put into it is what you get out of it. So again, the people, are my students who I realize from day one, they're that passionate, resilient type. I know they're going to get a job in this business, right? You can
Yeah.
just tell.
Yeah.
And so for someone to spend a couple $1,000s in total to get their, really, really good book put together. I mean, in no way are we like cutting corners and just saying, oh, here you go. It's like, no, we're really tough on students' books. And in fact, the last class before you're allowed to graduate, quote unquote, like it's got to kind of go through the ringer. And we always try and time it with the one show student competition, which is great. And so that's an annual competition put on by the one show where students from all over the world compete, and the bookshop proudly brings home pencils almost every year.
Wow.
Which is great. So we're going toe to toe with these other big ad schools, bringing home awards from these really international award shows. So that hopefully is proof that this does work. And I think more so, like I said, the hundreds or probably thousands of us who are working professionals who owe our careers to the bookshop is proof as well. So it really works. It's really fun. And if you have any interest at all, it's a few $100s to at least dip your toe in the water. And if it's not for you, it's not like you just committed to 2 years at a master's program
Right.
somewhere.
Right.
So
And
that's what's
I
great
mean,
about it.
I'm like, maybe I should
Sign
do
you
this.
up.
I need to
Let's
sign.
go.
Yeah, let's do it. Especially
Never
if,
too
if
late.
you're my instructor and we can go out and
That's
have
right.
some
I'll
beers
be easy on
afterwards.
you. I promise.
But I mean, what do you think? I mean, and you've talked about it, but if you could just kind of put a bow on it, I mean, why? What do you care? Why do you want to do this? Like, why do you want to? Because I'm sure it's you've got a demanding day job, and then you got to go and do this. Like, why?
Yeah.
What do you?
You
What
know,
do you?
early on, I didn't know that answer, but the more and more I do it, I think it's because it makes me a better creative director. I think it helps me do
Mm,
my job better. Because a lot of what I'm doing, of course, is acting as if I was a creative director in our classes, right? Like we give assignments, they go back, they come up with ads, they hang up them on the wall, and I critique them in the same way as my creative team would be showing me concepts at work. So
right.
it's all the cool stuff about coming up with ideas without the problem of worrying about budgets or clients, right? So it's a
Yeah.
perfect situation, right? So I really enjoy that, and I just think it keeps that tool sharp, or it's
Yeah.
just another way to continue to sharpen that tool of just being a creative director. And like what you said, by and large, a majority of the students I have in class are younger, right? They're in their early 20s, right out of school. So I love kind of hearing their perspective, and we always set aside time in class to talk about stuff. So what's going on in advertising? What are you guys
Yeah.
seeing? What are you liking? So it's sort of a little bit of research there on my part too, and just being able to talk to people, I think, is really interesting from other points of views, and then I think selfishly, it's I just like doing it because it's a way to give back.
Yeah.
It's just something personally rewarding that I like to do. And so I just get a kick out of it. I don't know. I really enjoy doing it.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
So we've come to that time in the show where it's time to pay off the title of the show, Confessions of a Creative Director. So,
All right.
Chris, what do you want to confess to? What do you want to get off your
Yeah.
chest?
Well, this sounds weird, but I was trying to think of a good answer for this. But I feel like you can be guilty of chasing perfection in this business. And I heard this quote once that was, "Don't let perfect ruin good."
Right.
And I thought a minute. I go, that sounds interesting. And it's not like, good enough is good enough. We're not saying like half-ass things, but there's something interesting. I think a lot of us, and myself in specifically, have been guilty of trying to make things perfect all the time.
Right.
And I think that's really hard, to maintain. Like, there's no such thing, I feel like. you want to make something as good as you can, but sometimes what happens if you chase perfection and you try and make something perfect, you end up kind of screwing it up sometimes. It's sort of like over polishing something.
Yeah, you take a little bit of the magic or the poetry out of it, right? It's
Yeah, you polish something too much, you take the shine away.
yeah.
And so I think that's a real hard thing to do in this business, because you want what you do to be so right. Like, we noodle things so much. And sometimes people are going to appreciate the imperfections more than they are the perfections in something. So I think I've been really guilty of that. And I think the more I've worked in this business, I've realized, like, not everything needs to be perfect.
Right.
To quote a rather odd sounding person to quote, but George Lucas, I love this quote. I'm kind of a Star Wars geek, but he has this saying. He says, "A film is never finished; it's only abandoned."
Yeah.
And I love that idea, because I feel like that's what every ad we create. It's never done. It's never going to be exactly how you want it to be. It's never going to be perfect. And sometimes people get caught up in that, and they end up sort of overcorrecting or worrying about the wrong thing, right? It's like, oh, the color of the girl's shirt should have been red, not blue. It's like, people don't care, you know, and you end up screwing something else up because you're trying to fix something else. So I think that would be my confession, is not trying to make every single thing perfect.
Yeah, and I think I used to have another creative director who used to say, like, they're little winks. They're like it's like a little wink at the audience, right? If there's something that's maybe not perfect that they may pick up on or not. But I agree, because at a certain point, and frankly, I think to our benefit, you know, especially after COVID, I think the world has changed, and I think we don't have that luxury anymore anyway to really, you know, fiddle around and like spend too much time on stuff that, you know, like my old boss used to say, buttering mouse turds. Right. It's like you got to get it out, because the world is moving so fast. The expectation for content is like everything's on demand. Right. I can get a car here. I can watch a show. I can get food here. Everything's on demand. And I think that, you know, now we don't even have that luxury to do that too much. But I think the bigger reason, to your point, is that sometimes you remove all the magic and the shine from it, like you said. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That's a good one. How you feel better? You feel like you've got.
I do. It's nice to get off my chest. Yes, it's okay. It's like the Stuart Smiley from SNL. You're good enough. Exactly. You're smart enough, and people like you.
Oh my gosh, I said that on somebody else's podcast. That's kind of like, you know, the way that you feel sometimes with the imposter syndrome and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoy talking to you when we get a few minutes. You're like the first person, I think, that reached out to me at the agency when I first started, and you'll always be cemented in my mind as the friendly guy that reached out and said, "Hey, man, I heard you have a podcast," and we struck a friendship. So hopefully that continues, and I look forward to working with you and talking to you, and man, I hope that people take you up on this offer to come check out the bookshop, because I think that it just sounds so amazing. And folks, if you're listening, I mean, I think you can't have a better instructor, someone that's been in this business and done a lot of great work. You know, have access to someone like Chris would be just phenomenal. So I hope they take you up on that. And so let's keep chatting. Let's go for coffee and burritos and beer or whatever you want to do, man.
Yeah.
It's been too long.
I mean, thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure. And again, glad to have a new friend. It's great. And it's fun. I love it.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, we'll talk soon.
Yeah. All right.
Take care.
Bye.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode of Confessions of a Creative Director in the books. Thanks to my very special guest, Chris DeNinno. We were talking for a little bit after the show there, and he just wanted to remind everybody, if you're interested, there's 4 slots left for this next semester, which starts on January 16th. 4 slots left. Go to thebookshopads.com to sign up. I mean, how great would it be to have Chris as your instructor? I might beat you to one of those slots. And for those of you who are looking to level up, maybe move into the role of creative director, pick up my new book, What's the Big Idea? An Indispensable Guide to Becoming a Kick-Ass creative director. It's available worldwide now on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, really anywhere you can find books. Check it out. It's filled with lots of great information that you can use to prepare for the role and just kick ass at it. So anyway, subscribe to the program. Please tell all your friends about it. Tell everybody about the book, too, if you wouldn't mind. And leave us a review. That's the way we're going to grow the audience. And yeah, I think this is the last episode for the year. So have a great holiday. Have a great new year. And we'll see you in 2023. Peace, love, and creativity. See ya.
I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but could you make the logo bigger?